So the next thing I want to talk about is Azure Backup. Now, Azure Backup is a great quick win for Tailwind traders environment. So what it allows us to do is actually simply not just backup and restore services in Azure, but also do that in a hybrid environment. It basically automatically allocates and manages the backup storage in the background, so you don't need to take care of that. You don't need to add more storage to the backup pool and stuff like that. You basically have unlimited scale available with local redundant storage and geo-redundant storage. Again, depending on your requirements, you can choose which one works better for you or what are your requirements. And this also obviously depends on the price you want to spend. And then there is no charge, by the way, for data when you need to restore, right? So you obviously, if you're familiar with Azure, usually ingoing traffic to Azure is free, and then outgoing traffic to Azure, there's some cost involved. We don't want to charge you if you restore a backup, right? So we don't do that in terms of when it comes to Azure Backup. And you have a pay-as-you-use model, right? So you only pay for the things you actually need and not for the storage. You don't need to pre-reserve storage or anything like that. You can just pay, and as soon as your storage grows, you obviously will also pay more automatically. Everything is encrypted. So when it comes to like data in transit from your on-premises machine to Azure, this is encrypted. Your on-premises to Azure Backup, the data in Azure, which is encrypted at rest with a key phrase we will set up when you set up the backup, and we will show you that in a quick demo. So you bring basically your own key phrase, and then for Azure VMs, for example, the data is encrypted at rest using the storage service encryption. Now, I also want to say there are some other features and properties with Azure Backup. So you have, for example, an application consistent backup. You have no limited amount of time data is stored in your recovery vault. You have a limit of 9,999 recovery points per protected instance. And then you have multiple options depending on what you need when it comes to Azure Backup, right? So for example, you have the Azure Backup agent, which you can actually go out and just install an agent on a Windows 10 machine or on a Windows server and then back that up. If you need to, for example, back up multiple systems or also applications, we have also something called the Azure Backup Server, which you can basically download and install for free on premises, and then you can do a short-term backup on that backup server and then offload the long-term backup to Azure. Azure Backup is also the service which basically backs up your Azure infrastructure as a service virtual machines, including, for example, SQL and Windows IaaS VMs. And then, as I mentioned before, it also can back up your Azure file shares as well. There's also more. So if you, for example, look at Azure Backup Server, it can back up and restore VMware VMs as well, Windows and Linux. Again, same thing, by the way, for Hyper-V VMs. You can back up files, folders, volumes, VMs applications like Exchange or SQL or SharePoint, and you can also back up like the system states of servers as well. It then backups basically to local attached disks for short-term storage. So if you need to back it up and then quickly restore it, you can do that directly without anything. But then for the long-term storage or also off-site storage, if you will, we have the Recovery Service Vault in Azure. Also mention quickly, because we get these questions a lot, it also does application-aware snapshots using VSS. It's full flexibility for when to take the backups. So you can completely configure that yourself. And you can also have a recovery granularity depending on what you actually want to recover. Now, if we look at an Azure Backup architecture, what we can see here, for example, we have an on-premises environment. We have a couple of workload servers like SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, file servers, and domain controllers. And then what we did here in this scenario, we installed a Azure backup server, which will actually back up these workloads. And then you can send them through Azure, again, over the internet or over ExpressRoute, or use even the Azure import and export service to actually, like when you have a big chunk of data you want to move, you can, for example, also leverage that as well. And then this will be stored basically in the Azure Recovery Vault, which will manage the storage in the background. We use Azure Storage for that. And then you can also replicate that to a secondary Azure region to make that like disaster recovery basically enabled if one of the Azure regions should go down. So let's have a quick look at Azure Backup. So here I'm back in Windows Admin Center. And what I want to do here is I want to back up the files on one of my servers here. So as you can see here, I click on my file server 1, which we used before. So if I quickly have a look at the files on that server, I can see here that I have my E drive. I now have a folder called Research. And in that folder, again, I have folder A, folder B, folder C, folder D. And now I want to configure Azure Backup to actually back up the folders and the files on that machine. So what I can do here is I can simply click on Setup Azure Backup. And this will then go out and ask me for my user account. It will also set up the Azure Backup for me. And then it will ask me, what do I want to back up? Now, in my case, I just want to back up the files on my E drive. And then here I can go out and I can select the retention rate and the schedules basically of the backup. So in this case, very simply, I select one of the pre-configured ones, daily, retain 30 days. And then I can enter my passphrase, my personal one I want to create. This is very important. If I need to restore files, I will need that passphrase. So make sure you save that on the secure location, because we can't help you restoring that. So now it sets up Azure Backup. It will install the backup agent in this case. And then we'll automatically configure the backup as I configure that. Now, it's obviously going out at a specific schedule, but I can also trigger the backup. So I'm going to trigger the backup to create a recovery point right now. This will start the backup and will take a couple of minutes to complete, especially because this is the initial backup. So on the jobs I can actually see what is going on here. So if I refresh, you can see that at the moment data is now transferred, and basically the backup is now completed. So I have now one recovery point basically of these files. So if I click on that, you can see here when this recovery point was created. And again, I can do that for multiple times, obviously. Now I go back to my files here. And what I'm going to do here in my research folder, I'm just going to now accidentally delete folder D. So folder D is now deleted with all the files in there. Now let's switch back to my server to actually show you that. So I'm here on that server, and if I go to my E drive, you can see here I have my folders research, and again you can see folder D is gone. Now I want to restore that. I can simply open up the Azure Backup console here, and you can see here I can find the same information here. Now I can click on recover data. I can say, okay, I want to recover from this server, just files and folders, like, so I don't want a whole drive, I just want to have some files from that. You can see here it's bold marked my last recovery point. You can also have, again, if you have multiple of these will show. And now it will basically open up that recovery point and mount it. And now I can go and see that mounted recovery point. So if I click on it, you can see here folder D is now here in this recovery point. So I can do a copy and then simply go to my server, go to research, and basically just go and paste folder D back. And so my folder D is now restored. I can also unmount the recovery folder or the recovery mount point And my files are available again. So this was Azure Backup. Again, there are multiple scenarios you can use that. However, there is even more. So we can also leverage this, Azure Site Recovery for disaster recovery. So what we can do here is we can actually replicate physical and virtual machines running on Hyper-V and VMware to Azure to then actually have a failover region basically available. So in this scenario, I'm going to show you here with Azure Site Recovery. You can see on the left side, I have my on-premises environment, which is basically, for example, in this case, a web app. So we have a IaaS web server and we have a database server, and we use Azure Site Recovery here to replicate it through Azure. And in case of a disaster, we can then go and fail over our virtual machines to Azure. So in this case, you can see on the right side, it would then have my web server and my SQL server restoring or recovering in Azure. And if we then have a service in front of it called, like, for example, Traffic Manager or Front Door, or depending on your architecture and your scenario, in this scenario, we would have, for example, Traffic Manager. We would just basically switch the routing, the DNS routing, from the location from our on-premises primary side to our Azure failover side, and the application would be available for the end users again. So absolutely great service. So let's go into a quick summary. So what we have seen so far is how Tailwind traders can use Windows Admin Center to consistently manage Windows Server workloads in a hybrid cloud environment. So you can take advantage of Windows Admin Center. You can basically go out and use that today. Even if you're not working with Azure, Windows Admin Center is a great management tool for Windows Server. We also saw how Tailwind traders can take advantage with Azure Arc and basically connect servers to the Azure control plane with Azure Resource Manager and manage them if they're running in Azure, on premises, or even at other cloud providers.